Welcome everyone to our January Sporecyte webinar. This is our first webinar of 2025. Hope everyone had a good new year and is ready to tackle 2025. This month's webinar will be primarily focused on cold weather related inspection and testing tips. Just a little information about some of the specific concerns that may be present in the wintertime related to mold and moisture in a home. There's also, we'll have a little update on a few other things, Sporecyte related at the beginning. Just wait a few moments for people to continue to join. If you have questions during my webinar today, go ahead and message them to us. We'll have Ashley from our marketing team fielding those questions, and I will be answering them as I go through, and then there'll be some dedicated time at the end for questions as well. So if this is your first time with us for a Sporecyte webinar, welcome. If you have been with us before, thanks for coming back. As always, these will be recorded and posted to you in an email and on our website after the webinar. Usually within a day or so, they'll be sent out in an email and on our website. So we'll go ahead and get started with this month's webinar. So our agenda is just do a quick intro, just let people know about Sporecyte if anyone's new. We'll have a little update on a few Sporecyte related things, our sampling pump and the air trap cassettes. And then we'll have some understanding winter mold risks, mold growth in cold temperatures, and testing, as well as specifically talking about outdoor sampling in inclement weather. And like I said, there'll be some Q&A time at the end. As always, if you have a question, post it in the chat, and we will answer them as we can. So I will be your host this evening. My name is Dylan McIntosh. I am the lab director, the product group manager for Sporecyte here at TechCyte. I'm a certified industrial hygienist. I've done mold inspections, hundreds of mold inspections, residential, commercial, industrial properties, mold, moisture, as well as other indoor air quality and workplace hazard assessments. A little bit about us. Our company is TechCyte. We're founded in 2013. We're world leaders in applying machine learning and artificial intelligence to digital microscopy tests. We focus on air, liquids, and smearable diagnostics. We don't do many things with tissues. We do things with things that are from the air or from liquids and fluids. We're used by laboratories, pathologists, doctors, vets, and home inspectors, as well as other environmental consultants all around the world. So we've got three kind of verticals here at TechCyte. So Sporecyte is our environmental arm, talking about mold, air quality. TechCyte is the brand that we use for our human analysis, where we have a collaboration with Mayo Clinic. And then our VetScan Images platform is a platform that is used exclusively with Zoetis, which is a world leader in animal health. Our laboratory, we are an AIHA MPAT participant for proficiency testing. We have a Texas mold analysis laboratory license, as well as ISO 17025 accredited. Texas, you might wonder why only Texas as far as a license for being a laboratory? Well, they're the only laboratory that requires having a license. So if there were other states that required it, we would have them as well. But that's the only one as of right now that requires. So here at Sporecyte, we're all about making you, the home inspectors' lives better. We want to provide you with the best testing solution and reporting we can to make it better for you and your clients. We try to, we have hands down the best technology in the industry. And we're all about bringing it to you at a quick turnaround time at an affordable cost. And like I said, the report deliverable is our big focus. So if you're new to Sporecyte, or maybe you haven't used this in a while, we do have same-day turnaround time. If your samples are received by our lab by 1 p.m., you'll get the report the same day. And we do offer an overnight return shipping option as well, using our discounted rates through UPS. So 2025, we're bringing a pretty minimal update to our pump that we designed and came out with about a little over a year ago. If you already have one of our existing pumps, it's not a reason to go out and run and buy a new one. But if you haven't bought one, we've brought some minor updates. The calibration adjustment on these pumps is improved. The screw in the previous pump has a definitive stop. If you turn it a certain amount of turns to the right or to the left, it'll stop. And we found that some inspectors were getting to the friction and turning it past that point and damaging the pump. Our new pump has a set screw that will continuously turn. You cannot turn it too much. Obviously, you can't infinitely increase or decrease the flow rate. So if you turn it too far, it just takes a turn and a half and it'll start adjusting downwards. Then we have some more robust control electronics on the inside to help bring just some dependability improvements to the pump. We learned a lot over the first year of having the pumps. We studied the ones that failed and how they failed, and we addressed it with this improvement. And then also it's coming to you with an international power supply. We have inspectors in areas like Australia, New Zealand, the UK, and continental Europe that wanted to use our pumps, but we had only shipped it with a North American power supply, which on their end, they were using adapters, but here we are shipping it with an international power supply as well. If you don't need the other adapters, just toss them. If you live across overseas or somewhere where it uses a different style, it will have a adapter for you. So AirTrap XLs are a new cassette out on the market. We don't manufacture them. They're not a product from Sporecyte, but they're a product that we really think is the best on the market. And they recently published an initial validation study. We'll be posting a blog about this, and if you're on an emailing list, you'll get an email when that blog goes live in about a week. But generally speaking, the study had showed that AirTrap cassettes are equivalent to the industry standard aerosol cassette, sampling efficiency, as well as the particulate trace distribution, etc. We have shown to be as good or better than the AirTrap or aerosol. And then there's also a data trend indicating that the AirTrap XL might actually have better spore capture, meaning it captures more mold spores than the other cassettes out there. It's a pretty small study, so it's not anything conclusive. That's why I'm saying it's a trend that it seems to be showing that. Future studies, I imagine, will be coming out from other parties, and we look forward to seeing those. So we'll jump right into our webinar for this month topic, winter moisture problems. So if you live in Arizona, if you live in South Texas, well, if you live in Houston, you had some snow not too long ago. The Southeast, winter doesn't mean to you what it does for the other 2/3 of the lower 48 states. But in general, here are some tips related to winter and cold weather. So if you've been on our webinar or any of our training before, mold ultimately is the outward symptom of an underlying moisture problem. You don't get mold growth without those water problems or moisture problems. And in the winter, there are some specific scenarios that you need to be aware of that are different than you would have during the warmer months. One being condensation. You can have condensation in the warmer months, especially around things like air conditioning ducts, things that are very cold, water pipes, air conditioning ducts that aren't insulated well, needing damp air. But in the winter, I'm sure we've all been in a home, maybe your home, my window right here in my office has a seal that's been compromised, so it's not insulating as well. It gets condensation on it from time to time. What condensation is the um, it's when humid, damp air meets a cool surface, the moisture, the water vapor that's in the air condenses down into liquid water onto those cooler surfaces. So these could be around windows, exterior walls, any number of places where the surface of the wall is below the dew point temperature, causing that water to condense. Precipitation, a big thing is snow. And it's not necessarily when the snow comes down, because it's not like rain. It doesn't cause, typically, unless it melts right away, uh, that moisture is trapped in the snow. But when the snow melts, you can have huge outwashes of water, especially if you live in a place that gets snow that accumulates through the winter, and then you have a big thaw in the spring. That snow that gets piled up, if it's collected around foundation walls, when that snow melts, now you have saturated earth right up against your foundation, which can cause moisture problems. Another big problem is I live in Chicago. The weather here is in the winter can be kind of unpredictable at times. We can have snow on the ground and then have a big rainstorm. And if the ground has been cold enough, it's actually frozen. When that rain comes in, the ground will start to warm up and melt, but that water is going to be pooling in weird places that it doesn't typically pool. Gutters, downspouts, maybe frozen solid and not working as you expect it to pull that moisture away from your home. Another big precipitation problem that we'll talk about in a little more detail are ice dams on roofs. So ice dams are essentially a formation of ice that causes liquid water to pool up and get in underneath the roofing material. And then also driven snow can cause snow to collect on surfaces that are usually protected against doorways, window sills, other things that you may expect to be protected from roofs or awnings, that if the wind is driving that snow, it can drift up and cause moisture in areas you're not expecting. So let's talk a little more about condensation. The colder surfaces are going to be where the condensation occurs. So things like windows, exterior walls. If you have uninsulated roofs, you can have condensation. Attic spaces without insulation. A very common thing that I've seen in my career is a DIYer putting in a new bathroom or kitchen exhaust fan, and they plumb the ductwork into the attic, but it doesn't go all the way outdoors. And that's just dumping that damp, moist air into the attic where it's condensing. What happens in these spaces a lot of the times is you'll have the nails from the shingles in the attic that will cause condensation. So you can see discoloration, dark discoloration around those nails where the liquid water has caused some of the metals in the nails to stain the immediate area, as well as on the floor below. And then the actual sheathing itself. It's very common if you have ductwork that doesn't get completed to the outside, or ductwork that may be leaking from those exhaust fans. I've seen it on exterior walls, specifically exterior walls that are uninsulated, maybe a gap of insulation was missed during construction. Under insulated walls, maybe the insulation has settled in a weird way, causing air gaps. And I've seen it where picture frames that are on exterior walls can trap moisture better than just the open air where the air is moving. And I've seen condensation occur between the photo and the wall, where you take the photo off the wall and there's nearly a perfect square of mold growth from that moist air getting trapped on that exterior surface. A big one is windows. Here's a photo of active condensation and mold growth, as well as you can see water staining from where that condensation has run off, collected in that windowsill, causing those water stains and that mold growth to occur. So ice dams are when you have an uninsulated or a under-insulated roof into your heat from the building escapes into the attic or into the roof interstitial space, and that heat will be enough to melt the snow. As the liquid water falls down the roof, it'll get to an edge that doesn't have a heating problem in a gutter or an eave. It'll then solidify again as ice, and that ice will build up, eventually causing what's shown here in this diagram, a space where water can collect and pool. And then that water will work its way under the roofing material and can work its way inside of the home and cause water problems inside of walls or ceilings that you may not be expecting. So, as with any good mold inspection, you should be considering how you're evaluating for moisture. So visual assessments are always good. If you're a home inspector, you're probably always on an eye out, have an eye out for water damage, either current or past. If you're using a moisture meter, if you use an infrared camera, those are really great tools to help track down these water problems. You can visually see if there's condensation occurring. Now, you're only at the property for an hour or two during, it may not be the coldest day of the year. Condensation will be more prevalent in days where it's very, very cold. Using a hydrometer to measure indoor relative humidity, you want to keep that. It's a bit of a balancing act to keep it as high as possible within reason for occupant comfort, because in the winter the air is very dry. So a lot of homes introduce humidity with whole home humidifiers or localized humidifiers, but you don't want it to be too much humidity that is causing condensation. Checking that those exhaust fans are functioning properly, as well as that the ductwork is completed to the outside as directly as possible, and not causing any leaks or other moisture to escape from those ductworks. And then, like I mentioned, whole house humidifiers are a more and more common of an add-on. Some people don't understand the dial on that should be adjusted with the exterior temperature. So the one in my home, it has a gauge that says exterior temperature, and you put it to the correct level. And it's really easy to forget that. So you might have it on a setting that's perfect for 35-degree weather, but you have a cold snap, it's below zero. Now suddenly you have too much humidity in there. You could be causing condensation problems. So we'll talk briefly about sampling during winter. Spoiler alert, it's not a whole lot different than sampling any other time of the year. Outdoor sampling, we'll talk about it a bit in a second, but our recommendation is to always collect an outdoor air sample. But you want to follow the cassette manufacturer's guidance as far as operational and storage temperature. For the cassettes, you don't want to necessarily be storing cassettes in your truck overnight when it's sub-zero outside. If that's outside of the storage temperature for guidance from the cassette manufacturers. Indoor sampling, if you do have your stuff outside in your truck or garage, before you sample, you want to bring that into your sampling area, let it acclimate to the indoor temperature before you check calibration. If that pump is at a colder temperature than it is when you're going to be sampling, that calibration that you're going to check the flow rate on may be varied based on the temperature of the equipment. So you want to make sure you're letting that acclimate. It should only take 10-15 minutes or so. So if you're doing a home inspection, you come in, do some of your other work before you do the mold testing. If you're just coming to do mold testing, it's a perfect opportunity to do visual assessments and other checks for any sort of moisture problems. So should you take an outdoor air sample in the winter? It's our recommendation that you always do. It's never going to hurt you. There are times where that outdoor air sample may be very, very low, nearly zero if there's a lot of snow cover, or if it's actively snowing, you may have very low levels. But that's better to have that interpretation, because mold spores aren't always local. They can blow in from far distances, and what's outside can impact what's inside. You're still going to be looking for these elevated levels indoors. And in the wintertime, it may be easier to pick up on some of those more subtle, minor problems indoors without worrying about the outdoor concentration. For example, cladosporium outside, we may find it anywhere from 500 to 5,000 spores per cubic meter in the summertime. In the wintertime, that may be very, very low. So if you've got 2,000 spores of cladosporium inside during the winter and your outdoor sample is nearly zero, that's indicative of a potential problem indoors. Is it common for, we have a question here from Daniel, is it common for when calibrating in cold weather to be a lower flow rate? It can affect, the temperature can affect the flow rate of your pump. Your flow rate should still be calibrated to the manufacturer's specifications. Of almost every cassette I'm aware of is 15 liters per minute. It's probably pretty minimal. So if you calibrate it inside, you go take an outdoor air sample, 5-10 minutes, it's pretty minimal, but you still want to make sure it's acclimated somewhat to your testing temperature before checking that calibration. Mentioned snowfall, snow cover and snowfall, where these instances of outdoor spore concentrations can be very, very low, but they can still be impacted from factors far outside of your localized area. And then active snowfall would be when levels will be at probably their very lowest. The action of that precipitation falling, particulate matter, and whether that be just general particulate matter or exhaust fumes from cars or road dust, that all gets kind of cleaned out of the air, collects on those snowflakes as they fall down, mold spores included. So the levels may be very, very low in those instances. That's kind of the one situation that Dr. Burge in this article here says that she thinks maybe the only time you don't need an outdoor air sample is during a snowstorm. Dr. Harriet Burge is one of the kind of originators of modern mold inspections and testing industry. She has had a column in the Indoor Environmental Connections newsletter. Here's the article from 2009. If you want a copy of this, I can send it to you. She talks about sampling during rain, snow, etc. And her recommendation is you should always take an outdoor air sample. I also agree with that stance as well. So that kind of wraps up our topic for this month. We've got 5 minutes or so for any additional questions that may be in the audience. If you have other questions that you don't think of now that you remember and think about later, go ahead and send us a message or an email. I've got a question from Lisa. I've yet to be convinced why it matters what mold is outside. I've been taught that indoor mold is inappropriate. Can you explain further? The mold inspector is health aware and only true inspector I know does not do outdoor air samples. Well, you need to have an outdoor air sample as a control or comparison. There's no published guidance from any reputable source for what is healthy, safe, acceptable indoor levels of mold. There are no indoor spaces that have no mold. So there's always going to be some amount of mold. It's typically related to that background amount that is from the outdoor air. So if you're not collecting an indoor air sample and an outdoor air sample, your indoor air sample is going to be very hard to interpret because it's not a presence absence. It's not, is there mold here? That's a problem, or is it not? We're looking for amplification of mold. We're looking for highly elevated levels of mold outside the bounds of the expected natural conditions, which are measured at the time with an outdoor air sample. Because what's in Florida is different than what's going to be in Maine or what's in Oregon or what's in Colorado. There's no one size fits all. And in the indoor environmental business, we're not just looking at what's present in the air as an indication of air quality, we're looking for the source as well. So if you're not taking an outdoor air sample and you find 1,000 spores of Cladosporium, you don't know if that's present from the outdoor air or if it's present from an internal source that needs to be remediated. This isn't answering my question. Lisa says Aspergillus and Penicillium. Not sure what your question is there. I feel like I answered the questions you had in relative relation to why you collect an outdoor air sample. Again, there's no guidance to say what level of indoor mold is acceptable or not acceptable. The industry standard, pretty much any sampling resource to learn how to collect mold samples will indicate collecting an outdoor air sample is a requirement to do a proper interpretation of the indoor air samples. Let's see if there's any other questions that come through from anyone else. Just a few moments. Should I expect suppressed indoor mold readings in the winter versus summer? Not necessarily. The levels indoor, if there are problems, will still be in the same expected quantities as if it was a problem in the summer versus winter. Your natural, the ambient levels, the naturally occurring levels of mold in your indoor air will be lower in the winter if there's no internal problems. Some things like housekeeping, presence of things like carpet, etc. You will have typically still have slightly higher than outdoor levels, but not high enough to indicate an issue in the wintertime. So generally, yes, levels indoor in a non-problematic area will be lower than in the summertime. But if there is indoor air quality problems related to mold, those levels will typically be in the same ballpark in any time of the year. All right, a couple minutes left, maybe time for one or two more questions if anyone has any additional questions. And as always, if we missed your question in the chat, or if you have a question that comes up afterwards that you'd like to ask, you can reach out to us, and we'd be happy to answer them outside of the webinar. I've got a couple more questions. We got two more questions here. I've had some pushback from clients saying that they don't need a mold test in the winter because it's so cold and that mold doesn't grow in the winter. Mold in your house is going to grow if it has the conditions, whether it's winter, summer, spring, fall. So what we're actually checking is we're testing the home to see if there's indications of indoor mold growth, which will be apparent in any season. So having a screening test like this done in the winter is just as important as in the summer. Now, we've talked about it at length in this webinar about how the naturally occurring molds outside are lower, and the expected indoor levels will also be lower in the winter. But for the most part, you're testing because you may not think there's a mold issue, but you want to just test, and you're still going to find a positive indication if there's a problem in the winter or any other time of the year. So it's still an opportunity to test whether you do it in the winter or not. Greg asked, do you recommend humidity sensor switches for exhaust fans? I think those are excellent ideas, especially if you have a rental property or if you have kids who aren't going to be using the fan regularly. Having a humidistat controlled switch to turn that fan on in the bathroom while the humidity is above a level is a great idea, because it's not just about having the fan on while you're showering. You want to have it on for some time afterwards as well to clear out any humidity. And some people don't turn it on until they walk out, and then they only leave it on for a few minutes. That may not be enough. So those switches, whether it's a timer or humidistat controlled, are great ideas. One more question. What's the best way to take an outdoor sample in the rain, and will it affect the level of mold spores? So you want to avoid um, getting liquid water in the cassette. We've got a blog on this on our website if you want to check that out. Um, Essentially, you want to either orient the inlet so it isn't going to get rain dripped into the inlet, or what I've done is I've stood out in the yard with an umbrella um, over top of the cassette. You don't want to stand right over it, but at arm's length with an umbrella over to keep rain out. Obviously, you don't want to do that in a thunderstorm. That's also one of the times I don't take an outdoor sample is in a thunderstorm because I don't want to get struck by lightning. But the big thing is to avoid liquid water getting into the cassette itself. And usually, unless it's blowing in sideways, just having something over top like an umbrella is good enough. Will it affect the level of mold coming in? Not likely. The general outdoor levels during rain are different than during dry, but we're not, since the air pump is actively pulling air in, having an umbrella over the top, 3 feet away from the inlet, you're far outside of that um, uh, area where the capture is actually coming from. And spores aren't just falling into the top of the cassette, they're actively being pulled in. So you're not likely going to miss anything. And then one last question before I wrap up for tonight. At what temperature would I expect the medium to freeze? Say 0 degrees. It's going to be based on the manufacturer's specifications. They will have their own recommendations as far as operating and storage temperatures. Some of them may say 0, some may say freezing. And then there's an upper bound to that as well in the summer as far as what's too hot. So there's too hot and too cold. You would want to check specifically with the manufacturer of the cassette type that you use for sampling for more information on their specific cassettes. And with that, I will wrap up this month's webinar. As always, thanks for joining. We'll have another webinar here next month. Look forward to seeing you all there next month. And again, this will be recorded and sent out to you in just a day or so afterwards. Thank you.